Story 1. Forest Path. In a small town surrounded by a dense and mysterious forest, a group of teenagers decided to explore the area after hearing stories of disappearances that always haunted the region. The center of this group were Lucas, Rachel, Peter, and Anna, all inseparable friends since childhood. It was an autumn afternoon, and the red and golden leaves were slowly falling from the trees. The group met at Lucas's house to discuss the details of the expedition. There was an unused trail that crossed the forest, and according to legends, it was there that people disappeared. "Come on, guys. We need to prove these stories are just legends," said Lucas, always the fearless leader of the group. Rachel, with a mix of excitement and apprehension, agreed. "But we need to be careful. Bring flashlights and blankets in case we need to spend the night." Peter and Anna, more cautious, hesitated, but curiosity got the better of them. Equipped with flashlights, blankets, and a good dose of courage, they set off toward the forest. As they entered the trail, the daylight began to fade under the dense canopy of trees. The silence was broken only by the rustling of leaves and the careful steps of the friends. The feeling of being watched grew with every step. They tried to ignore it, nervously laughing and telling stories to ease the tension. "Did you hear that?" Anna asked, suddenly stopping. Everyone fell silent. In the oppressive silence of the forest, they heard a faint whisper, as if someone was calling their names. Lucas laughed, but the sound lacked joy. "It must be the wind," he said, trying to sound confident. They continued along the trail, but the whispers intensified, accompanied by fleeting shadows among the trees. The atmosphere grew heavier, and the group began to feel the weight of fear. Every sound, every movement in the forest seemed charged with sinister intention. "Maybe we should go back," suggested Peter, his voice trembling. "We're almost there," insisted Lucas. "Just a little further." They reached a clearing where they found traces of old campsites and remnants of campfires. "Looks like someone's been here recently," observed Rachel, examining the area. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. Anna, who had strayed a bit from the group, was gone. Anna, where are you?" shouted Lucas, running in the direction of the sound. The group panicked, frantically searching for Anna. The whispers were now louder, almost deafening, and the shadows seemed to close in. Lucas found a hidden path between the trees leading to a deeper part of the forest. They followed the path until they reached a strange and disturbing area. An old ritual site. There were stones arranged in a circle, covered in worn and ancient symbols. In the center was a stone altar, stained with something that looked like blood. "This isn't good," murmured Rachel, her face pale. Peter pointed to a shadow moving at the edge of the circle. "There, I saw something." Lucas and Rachel followed Peter, but the shadow disappeared before they could reach it. The whispers had now turned into clear voices, speaking in an ancient and unknown language. Suddenly, an intense cold enveloped them, and they felt an overwhelming and malevolent presence. In the center of the circle, a hooded figure appeared, tall and slender, with eyes glowing a demonic red. "You shouldn't be here," said the figure, its voice reverberating through the space. Lucas, trying to stay calm, asked, "Where is our friend? What have you done with her?" The figure laughed, old and cruel sound. "She is just another offering, as you will soon be." Rachel, desperate, remembered an old book she had read about rituals and entities. "We need to break the circle," she whispered to Lucas and Peter. "It's our only chance." As the figure advanced, the friends ran to the stones forming the circle, kicking them and trying to undo the symbols. The figure screamed in fury, and the forest around them began to shake violently, as if it were alive. Finally, with a last effort, they managed to break the circle. The figure let out a deafening scream and disappeared in a cloud of black smoke. Silence returned to the forest, but it was a different silence, less oppressive. The friends ran back to the clearing, where they found Anna lying on the ground, unconscious but alive. They carried her back along the trail, not looking back until they were out of the forest. Back in the safety of the town, they told their story to the authorities, who were initially skeptical, but decided to investigate. They found no traces of the ritual site, as if it had never existed. Anna slowly recovered, but the experience left deep marks on all of them. They never returned to the forest and avoided any mention of the place. The story of the forest path became an urban legend in the small town, a cautionary tale about the dangers of exploring the unknown and the dark secrets that may be hidden in seemingly tranquil places. Story 2. The Ghost Town. In a remote region, far from the curious eyes of the world, there existed a town that had long been abandoned and forgotten. Its decaying buildings and deserted streets told stories of glory and mystery. This was the town of Elysium, a place that seemed to have been frozen in time. No one knew exactly why its inhabitants had disappeared, but legends and rumors of mysterious disappearances always surrounded that. Daniel, a determined and curious journalist, decided to investigate the story of Elysium for an article. He believed that the truth was buried in the ruins of the ghost town. Accompanied by his friend and photographer, Carl, two ventured to the site. They arrived at dusk, the sky tinged with orange and red as the shadows of the night began to swallow the landscape. The ruins of Elysium emerged before them, imposing and silent. "This is eerily beautiful," commented Carl, adjusting his camera. "Yeah, but don't be fooled by appearances. Let's be careful," replied Daniel, feeling a shiver run down his spine. The two began exploring the town, recording every detail with Carl's camera. The streets were covered with dry leaves and debris, and the facades of the buildings were slowly crumbling. They entered an old store, where products still sat on the shelves, covered in dust and cobwebs. "It's like people just left suddenly, leaving everything behind," observed Daniel, noting in his notebook. As they explored further, they began to notice unsettling signs. Recent footprints in the dust, doors that seemed to have been opened and closed recently, and the occasional sound of footsteps echoing in the empty street. "We're not alone here," whispered Carl, his eyes wide with fear. Daniel tried to stay calm. "Let's investigate more. Maybe we'll find someone who can tell us what happened here." The duo reached a large mansion in the center of town, which seemed to be the most well-preserved building. Inside, they found a grand hall with luxurious furniture covered by white sheets. An imposing staircase led to the upper floors. They decided to go up, their flashlights casting beams of light that danced on the walls covered with old portraits. As they explored the rooms, they found diaries and letters that told the story of the former inhabitants. They discovered that Elysium had been abandoned after a series of mysterious disappearances that terrorized the community. People began to vanish without a trace, and fear took hold, leading the survivors to flee. Carl photographed the pages of the diaries while Daniel read aloud. It seems there was a cult that performed rituals in the town. They believed they could summon entities from another world to gain power and immortality. When the rituals went wrong, the disappearances started. "That explains a lot," said Carl, still taking photos. "But where is everyone now?" Suddenly, they heard a muffled scream from downstairs. They ran to see what was happening, but found nothing but the echo of their own steps. The tension increased with each moment, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. They decided to check the mansion's basement, where they believed the rituals might have taken place. They descended a narrow, dark staircase, and upon reaching the basement, they found a large hall with symbols carved into the walls and an altar in the center. Carl took a photo of the altar, but the camera started to malfunction. "Something's not right here," he said, trying to adjust the equipment. Daniel examined the altar more closely and found a small wooden box. Inside, he discovered an ancient amulet and a letter. This amulet was used in the rituals to summon the entity. Maybe it's the key to understanding what happened. As they discussed the significance of the discovery, Carl suddenly disappeared. Daniel, panicking, searched for his friend, found only the fallen camera. "Carl, where are you?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the cold basement walls. Daniel felt a cold presence behind him and turned quickly. A hooded figure with glowing, empty eyes stood there, watching him. "Who are you?" he asked, voice trembling. "I am a guardian of Elysium," replied the figure, its voice reverberating through the hall. "You shouldn't be here." "I just want to know what happened to my friend," said Daniel, trying to stay calm. "He is now part of Elysium, like all the others who dared to disturb our rest," said the figure, advancing slowly. Daniel held the amulet tightly, feeling a strange energy emanating from it. "How can I free the souls trapped here?" he asked, desperate. "You can't," replied the figure with a grim smile. "The town is condemned. All who enter never leave. Daniel felt despair rising but didn't give up. He began to recite the names of the former inhabitants he had read in the diaries, hoping it might help somehow. Figure recoiled, seeming to weaken. "Stop," shouted the figure, now with a trembling voice. Realizing he was on the right track, Daniel continued to recite the names and rituals described in the diaries. Figure began to fade slowly, and an intense light filled the basement. Daniel felt a comforting warmth around him and heard whispers of gratitude. When the light disappeared, he found himself alone in the basement. Carl was lying on the ground but breathing. Daniel ran to him and woke him up. "We're free," said Carl weakly. The two left the mansion and exited Elysium as quickly as they could. They returned to town and told their story. Few believed them. Nevertheless, Daniel wrote a detailed article about the ghost town and the dark secrets they had uncovered, warning others about the dangers of tampering with unknown forces. Elysium was avoided by everyone thereafter, and the legend of the ghost town became a cautionary tale. Daniel and Carl continued with their lives. The experience left a deep mark on them, always reminding them of the hidden dangers and dark forces that might lurk in forgotten places. Story 3. The Cursed Mirror. In a charming little town, there was a small antique shop known for its unique items steeped in history. The owner, Mr. Thompson, was an elderly and friendly man who knew the stories behind every object in his shop. Among the most intriguing items was an old mirror with a golden frame and elaborate details, which seemed to attract curious glances. It was in this setting that Peter and Laura, a young couple who had just moved to the town, decided to visit the shop in search of something special to decorate their new home. As they entered, they were immediately drawn to the mirror. It seemed to have an aura of its own, reflecting a strange light that didn't match the shop's lighting. "This mirror is amazing," exclaimed Laura, enchanted. "It's really beautiful," agreed Peter. "Should we get it?" Mr. Thompson, noticing the couple's interest, approached with a serious look. "This mirror has a peculiar story," he said. "It belonged to a former owner who was obsessed with the occult. Many believe it carries a curse." Laura, always skeptical, laughed lightly. "Curse? Sounds like an interesting story to tell friends." Despite the warning, the couple decided to buy the mirror and take it home. They placed it in the living room, where it would become the center of attention. That night, while watching a movie, they began to notice something strange. The mirror seemed to reflect more than just the room. There were shadows and indistinct forms moving within it. "Are you seeing this?" Peter asked, uneasy. Laura nodded, her eyes fixed on the mirror. "Yes, it's like something is inside it." They decided to ignore the phenomenon, believing it was just fatigue. However, the events began to intensify. Objects in the house inexplicably moved, and whispering voices echoed through the halls at night. Peter started having vivid nightmares, always involving the mirror and a dark figure that seemed to watch his every move. One morning, Laura found a message written on the mirror in an inexplicable mist. "Help me." Fear began to grip the couple. They decided to research more about the mirror's history and discovered it had belonged to a man named Victor, practiced occult rituals in hopes of achieving immortality. He mysteriously disappeared, and his spirit was said to be trapped in the mirror. "We need to get rid of this," Peter said, determined. "But how?" asked Laura, looking at the mirror with fear. Peter remembered Mr. Thompson and decided to go back to the shop for help. Mr. Thompson, upon hearing about the events, agreed to help them. "There's a ritual that can release the spirit trapped in the mirror," he said. "But it's dangerous. We need to be prepared." That night, Mr. Thompson came to the couple's house, bringing candles, salt, and an old book of rituals. They placed the mirror in the center of the living room and began to prepare the ritual. The atmosphere was charged with palpable tension. "Let's begin," said Mr. Thompson, lighting the candles and drawing a circle of salt around the mirror. As he recited ancient words, the mirror's surface began to glow intensely. Victor's dark figure appeared, his eyes filled with despair. "Release me," Figure pleaded, his voice echoing through the room. Peter and Laura held hands, trying to stay calm. Mr. Thompson continued the ritual, his voice firm and authoritative. "Restless spirit, we seek peace for you. Leave this world and move on to the next." Suddenly, the mirror began to shake violently, and Victor's figure seemed to struggle against an invisible force. The candles went out, and a gust of cold air swept through the room. Peter felt as if he was being pulled towards the mirror by an invisible force. "Hold on tight," shouted Mr. Thompson, increasing the intensity of his words. Finally, with an agonizing scream, Victor's figure was pulled into the mirror, which shattered into 1,000 pieces with a deafening crash. The room fell silent, except for the sound of their heavy breathing. Peter and Laura looked around, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. "Is it over?" asked Laura, still trembling. "Yes, the spirit has been released," confirmed Mr. Thompson, gathering the pieces of the mirror. "But remember, the supernatural should never be underestimated." In the following days, the house returned to normal. The strange phenomena ceased, and the couple finally breathed a sigh of relief. They kept in touch with Mr. Thompson, thanking him for his help and promising to be more cautious in the future. Peter and Laura learned the importance of respecting old objects and their stories. They turned the experience into a valuable lesson, sharing their story with friends and family as a warning about the dangers of the unknown.